The throne room was dark, lit only by crystals that captured starlight from distant suns. The walls stretched up so high that shadows gathered at the ceiling like storm clouds. In the center of this vast hall sat the obsidian throne, black as deep space and smooth as glass. No one had sat on it for 47 days. The reason no one dared approach was simple. A creature lay coiled around the base of the throne, and that creature had killed 17 guards, 3 nobles, and would have killed the royal children if they had taken just 2 more steps forward. The Vraxians called it Velkrathar. In the old language, this meant the ender of lines. Most people just called it the Dread. It was massive. If it stood on its hind legs, it would reach 3 stories tall. It had 6 legs, each ending in claws that could tear through starship metal. Its scales were harder than military armor, black with edges that glowed dull red like cooling lava. The head was long and wolf-like, but the eyes were wrong. Too large, too bright, glowing like twin suns about to die. When it breathed, the air shimmered with toxins that made most species freeze in terror. The Dread had been created 3,000 years ago by the ancient Vraxian warlords. Back then, the Empire was young and brutal. The warlords needed something that would make sure only the true emperor could claim the throne. So they took genetics from a dozen different predators and mixed them together. They added artificial instincts and biological locks. The result was the Dread. It was designed to recognize the rightful heir through genetic markers and something the Vraxians called psychic resonance. If you were meant to rule, the Dread would know. It would bow its head and let you pass. If you were not the heir, if your blood did not sing the right song, the Dread would kill you. For 3,000 years, this system had worked. Emperors died and the Dread recognized their children. Power passed smoothly from one generation to the next. The creature never failed, until now. Emperor Thalvex had collapsed during a council meeting. His heart stopped beating before the doctors could reach him. He left behind 3 children, Vera, Kelrin, and Sithik. Each believed they should rule. Each had their supporters among the noble houses and the military fleets. Princess Vera had tried first. She was the eldest and commanded the loyalty of the eastern fleets. She had walked into the throne room with her head held high, certain of her right to rule. The Dread had risen to its feet, fixed those burning eyes on her, and growled. The sound was so deep it made the floor vibrate. Vara had frozen at 35 paces from the throne. When she took one more step forward, the Dread roared. The sound shattered 3 crystals on the walls. Vara had backed away, her face pale. Prince Kelrin tried next. He was the middle child, commander of the Central Armies, known for his tactical mind. He brought scientists who scanned the Dread, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The creature watched them set up their equipment. When Kelrin stepped forward, the Dread moved faster than something that size should be able to move. It crossed 20 paces in a heartbeat and snapped its jaws shut just inches from Kelrin's face. He had stumbled backward, and only the quick action of his guards had prevented a disaster. Prince Sithak was the youngest. He was quieter than his siblings, more interested in history and philosophy than warfare. He had studied the old records and noticed something. In the ancient murals from the time of the warlords, the Dread was always shown beside its masters, not just in throne rooms but in gardens, in studies, in places of rest. He wondered if the creature needed something more than just genetic recognition, but when Sithak approached, the Dread reacted the same way. It rose, it growled, and it made clear that he would not pass. The empire began to fracture. Without an emperor, the noble houses started to choose sides. Some supported Vera, others Kelrin. A few backed Sithak, though he had the smallest following. Fleet commanders moved ships into defensive positions. Vassal worlds stopped sending their tribute, waiting to see who would win. Trade routes collapsed as merchants feared getting caught in the wrong territory. The High Council met every day, searching for answers. They brought in experts on bioengineering, but the techniques used to create the Dread had been lost centuries ago. They consulted psychics who claimed they could read the creature's mind, but the Dread killed 2 of them before the council banned any more attempts. They even discussed destroying the Dread and the throne together, starting fresh with a new system of succession. That was when the human delegation arrived. Humanity was new to the galactic community. They had only been traveling faster than light for 200 years. Most of the older species saw them as primitive curiosities. Humans were too emotional, too attached to strange ideas about fairness and feelings. They kept animals as companions, which most species found bizarre. They formed bonds with creatures that had no strategic value. The human delegation was small: an ambassador, 3 aides, and 2 specialists sent to study Vraxian culture. One of those specialists was named Doyun. Doyun was a xenobiologist. He studied alien life forms, trying to understand how they thought and behaved. He was thin and quiet, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and hands that were always moving, always taking notes. He had read every report about the Vraxian Empire he could find. The bioengineering achievements fascinated him. When he heard about the crisis with the Dread, he asked the ambassador if he could investigate. The ambassador was skeptical. This was an internal Vraxian matter. Humans should not interfere. But Doyen was persistent. He explained that he had experience with difficult creatures, that he might see something the Vraxians had missed. The ambassador finally agreed to ask. To everyone's surprise, the Vraxian council said yes. They were desperate. What harm could one human do that had not already been tried? Doyun arrived at the throne room with his colleague Hyejin. She was a cultural anthropologist who studied how societies worked. She was older than Doyun, with gray streaks in her black hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Together they stood at the entrance to the throne room, looking into the shadows. "That's it?" Hyejin asked, pointing at the darkness near the throne. "That's it," confirmed Nari, the Vraxian security officer assigned to escort them. She was tall and scaled, with the purple-gray skin common among her people. "Do not go past the safety line, 35 paces from the throne. If you cross that line, I cannot protect you." Doyen stared into the darkness. He could see the shape of the Dread now. It was enormous, even lying down. As he watched, the creature shifted. Its head lifted. Those glowing eyes fixed on him. Most people would have felt fear. Terror was the natural response to a creature designed to kill. But Doyen felt something else. He tilted his head, studying the way the Dread held itself. The tension in its shoulders, the way its ears lay flat against its skull. "Can I come back tomorrow?" Doyen asked. "I need to watch it for a while." Nari looked at him like he was insane. "Watch it do what? Lie there?" "Yes," Doyen said simply. "I need to see how it behaves when it thinks no one important is watching." Hyejin smiled. She knew that tone. Doyen had seen something already. They left the throne room, but Doyen kept looking back over his shoulder. In the darkness, the Dread watched him leave. Its eyes glowed steady and unblinking, following the small human until he disappeared from view. That night, Doyen could not sleep. He kept thinking about those eyes, about the way the creature had held itself. He had seen that posture before in animals on Earth, not in predators ready to hunt, in creatures that were lonely. Doyen returned to the throne room the next morning carrying a small bag and a data tablet. Nari met him at the entrance, her arms crossed over her chest. "You are serious about this?" she asked. "Very serious," Doyen replied. He walked to the safety line and sat down on the floor, his back against a pillar. He took out his tablet and began making notes. Nari watched him for 10 minutes, then shook her head and left. Humans were strange. The Dread watched Doyen from its position near the throne. The creature did not move for 2 hours. It simply stared at the human who sat so still and quiet. Doyen did not stare back. That was important. Staring was a challenge among predators. Instead, he glanced at the Dread every few minutes, then looked away. He made notes about the throne room, the crystals on the walls, the old murals. He sketched the layout. He acted like the Dread was just another part of the architecture. After 3 hours, the Dread shifted position. It stretched its front legs, claws scraping against stone, then settled back down. Doyen noted the time and the movement on his tablet. At midday, Hyejin arrived with food. She sat beside Doyen and unwrapped 2 sandwiches. They ate in silence, still not looking directly at the creature. When they finished, Doyen took a piece of dried meat from his bag. He tossed it gently toward the throne, about halfway between himself and the Dread. The meat landed on the stone floor with a soft sound. The Dread's ears twitched forward. Its nose lifted slightly, testing the air, but it did not move toward the food. "Is it working?" Hyejin whispered. "Too early to tell," Doyen replied. "But did you see the ears?" "Yes, it's curious." They stayed for another hour, then left. The piece of meat remained on the floor, untouched. The next day, Doyen came back. He sat in the same spot and followed the same routine. The meat from yesterday was gone. He did not know if the Dread had eaten it or if cleaning drones had removed it. He tossed another piece, again not watching when he did. This time he brought a small music player. He set it to low volume and played recordings from Earth. Bird songs. Wind through trees. The distant howl of wolves. Sounds that were organic and natural, not mechanical or threatening. The dread lifted its head, those glowing eyes fixed on the device. Doyen pretended not to notice. He made notes, humming softly along with the music. On the third day, Heejin brought files she had pulled from the Vraxian archives. They were old, some of them 3,000 years old from the time when the dread was first created. "Look at this," she said, showing Doyen an image on her tablet. It was a mural from an ancient palace. It showed one of the warlords sitting in a garden. Beside him, lying in the sun, was the dread. The creature's head rested on the warlord's lap. "They lived together," Doyen said slowly. "It wasn't just a guardian. It was a companion." "The later emperors stopped that," Heejin said. "Look at these records." 200 years after the warlords died, the emperors began treating the dread differently. They kept it in the throne room all the time. They fed it through automated systems. They stopped touching it. "How long has it been alone?" Doyen asked. Heejin scrolled through the files. The last recorded physical contact between an emperor and the dread was 2,700 years ago. Doyen felt something cold settle in his stomach. 2,700 years. Alone in this room. No companions, no touch. Just duty and darkness and the endless parade of emperors who saw it as a tool, not a living creature. "That's why it's not recognizing the heirs," Doyen said. "It's not broken. It doesn't trust anyone anymore." That evening, Doyen requested a meeting with the High Council. They gathered in a circular chamber with seats arranged in tiers. Doyen stood in the center, feeling very small and very human among the tall Vraxians. Princess Vera sat in the highest seat, her face cold. Prince Kelrin leaned forward, his fingers drumming against the armrest. Prince Sithak sat quietly in the corner, listening. "You have had 3 days," Vera said. "What have you learned?" Doyen took a breath. "The dread is not malfunctioning. It's suffering from psychological damage caused by extreme isolation." Several council members hissed a Vraxian sign of displeasure. Kelrin stood up. "You dare suggest the Sacred Guardian is damaged?" "It is perfect. It is eternal." "Nothing that lives is perfect," Doyen replied calmly. "The dread was bioengineered to be loyal, yes. But loyalty requires a foundation. The ancient warlords understood this. They lived with the dread. They treated it as a companion. Your ancestors stopped doing that." "We do not need to coddle a weapon," Vera said sharply. "It's not a weapon," Doyen said. "It's a social creature that has been alone for thousands of years. You designed it to bond, then you isolated it. Now it doesn't trust anyone. That's why it won't accept your heirs, not because they're unworthy, but because the dread has learned that people are not safe." The council chamber erupted in argument. Some members shouted that Doyen was insulting their culture. Others demanded he be removed. A few looked thoughtful. Sithak stood up. The arguing slowly quieted. "What do you propose?" he asked Doyen. "Let me try to establish trust," Doyen said. "Not dominance, not control. Trust. It will take time. But I believe I can help the dread learn to accept people again." "And if you fail?" Farah asked coldly. "Then you're no worse off than you are now," Doyen said. "But if I succeed, you'll have your emperor and a healthier guardian." Nari, who had been standing by the wall, spoke up. "I have worked with humans before. They have unusual success with creatures others consider impossible to reach. I recommend we allow this attempt." The council debated for an hour. Finally, they agreed. Din would have 10 days. If he failed, they would move forward with more extreme solutions. No one said what those solutions were, but Doyen could guess. They would destroy the dread and the throne, then choose an emperor through other means. The next morning, Doyen entered the throne room with his bag of dried meat and his music player. But this time he walked 5 paces closer to the throne before sitting down. The dread immediately rose to its feet. Its lips pulled back, showing teeth the size of knives. A low growl filled the chamber. Doyen sat down smoothly, not running, not freezing. He unpacked his lunch and began to eat. He kept his movements slow and predictable. He did not look at the dread. The growling continued for 5 minutes. Then 10. Doyen ate his sandwich and drank water from a bottle. He took out his tablet and began reading, playing soft music from his speaker. After 15 minutes, the growling stopped. The dread sat down, still watching, still tense. but it had stopped warning him. Progress. Do-yoon spent the rest of the day in that spot. He talked sometimes, speaking in a low, calm voice, not to the dread directly, but as if narrating his thoughts. This throne room is fascinating. These crystals must be centuries old. I wonder what star they captured light from. The dread's ears moved, tracking his voice. When evening came and Do-yoon prepared to leave, he placed a piece of meat on the floor closer to the dread than ever before. Then he stood, stretched, and walked away without looking back. Behind him he heard movement, the soft scrape of claws on stone. He did not turn around. He kept walking. Later, Nari told him the security footage showed the dread approaching the meat within minutes of Do-yoon leaving. It had eaten the offering, then returned to its position by the throne. But before settling down, the creature had looked toward the doorway where Do-yoon had left. And its tail, that massive scaled appendage, had moved. Just once. Just slightly. Do-yoon smiled when he heard that. It was the smallest sign, but for him it meant everything. The dread was starting to hope. On the fourth day, something changed. When Do-yoon entered the throne room, the dread was not in its usual position beside the throne. It was sitting closer to the entrance, about 20 paces from where Do-yoon normally sat. Do-yoon stopped and studied the creature. The dread stared back, head tilted slightly to one side. Waiting. This was a test, Do-yoon realized. Or perhaps an invitation. The creature was meeting him halfway. Slowly, Do-yoon walked to his usual spot and sat down. The dread watched every movement. When Do-yoon pulled out his food, the creature shifted position, moving a few paces closer. Still not within touching distance, but closer than it had ever been. Do-yoon unwrapped his sandwich and took a bite. The dread's nose lifted, testing the air. Do-yoon took out a large piece of dried meat and placed it on the floor beside him, not throwing it this time. Just setting it down within easy reach. Then he waited. The dread rose to its feet. It moved forward with careful steps, each massive paw placed deliberately on the stone floor. 20 paces became 15. 15 became 10. The creature stopped 5 paces away. This close, Do-yoon could see details he had never noticed before. The scales were not perfectly uniform. Some were scarred, others worn smooth at the edges. There was a patch on the creature's shoulder where the scales grew in a different pattern, probably an old injury that had healed. The eyes, which glowed so bright from a distance, had depths to them up close, layers of color, gold and amber and red. The dread lowered its head toward the meat. Its jaws opened. For a moment, Do-yoon saw directly into that mouth, saw the rows of teeth designed to crush and tear. Then the jaws closed around the meat and the dread pulled back. It did not retreat to the throne. Instead, it sat down where it was, 5 paces from Do-yoon, and ate the meat while watching him. Do-yoon continued eating his own lunch, acting as if this was completely normal. Inside, his heart was racing. Outside, he kept his movements calm and steady. They sat together for an hour. When Do-yoon took out his tablet to read, the dread's ears perked forward with interest. When he played music, the creature's eyes half closed, as if listening carefully. Hyejin arrived in the afternoon and stopped dead when she saw how close the dread was to Do-yoon. She made a small noise of surprise. The dread's head swung toward her, ears flattening. A warning growl rumbled through the chamber. "It's okay," Do-yoon said softly, speaking to the dread for the first time directly. "She's a friend. She's safe." The dread looked back at Do-yoon, then at Hyejin, then at Do-yoon again. The growling stopped, but the creature remained tense. Hyejin, understanding the situation, sat down near the entrance. She did not try to come closer. She pulled out her own tablet and began working quietly. The dread watched her for 10 more minutes, then gradually relaxed. By the time evening came, it seemed to accept that Hyejin was part of the routine. On the 5th day, Do-yoon brought a grooming brush. It was designed for large animals on Earth with soft bristles. When he sat down, he placed it on the floor where the dread could see it. The creature stared at the brush with obvious curiosity. It leaned forward, sniffing carefully. Then it looked at Do-yoon as if asking a question. "For scratching itches," Do-yoon explained, picking up the brush and running it over his own arm to demonstrate. "Feels good on spots you can't reach." The dread tilted its head again. That gesture was becoming familiar. It meant the creature was processing information, thinking. Do-yoon did not push. He set the brush down and went about his normal routine. But he noticed the dread kept glancing at the brush throughout the day. The next morning, when Do-yoon arrived, the dread did something it had never done before. It approached him directly, stopping just 3 paces away. Then it lay down on its belly and pushed its head forward along the floor until it was almost within reach. Doyen's breath caught. This was significant. Predators did not expose their necks and heads to potential threats. This was a gesture of trust and invitation. "Okay," Doyen said quietly. "Okay, I understand." He picked up the grooming brush and moved forward on his knees, closing the distance slowly. The dread's eyes tracked his every movement, but the creature did not pull away. Doyen reached out with the brush and gently touched it to the dread's head. The creature flinched, every muscle tensing. Doyen froze. They stayed like that for a long moment, both completely still. Then slowly the dread relaxed. Its eyes closed halfway. And it leaned into the brush. Doyen let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. He began to brush gently, working over the creature's head, behind its ears, along its neck. The dread made a sound deep in its chest, a rumbling that was almost like a purr. He found places where the scales had caught debris over the years, small irritations the creature could never scratch on its own. He worked carefully, mindful of the sensitive spots. The dread shifted position occasionally, guiding him toward areas that needed attention. When Doyen's arm got tired, he sat back. The dread opened its eyes and looked at him. Then it did something that made Doyen's eyes sting with tears. The creature pressed its massive head against Doyen's chest, just for a moment. A gesture of affection, of gratitude. Doyen raised his hand and placed it flat against the dread's scaled forehead. "I know," he whispered. "I know you've been alone. I'm sorry that happened to you." The dread rumbled again, softer this time. Then it pulled back and returned to its position near the throne. But the dynamic had changed completely. This was no longer a standoff. This was a friendship beginning to form. Nari watched the security footage 3 times before she believed it. She brought it to the council that evening. "The human has made contact," she reported. "Physical contact." The dread accepted his touch and showed signs of bonding. Vera's face remained cold. "Bonding with a human does not solve our succession crisis." "Perhaps not directly," said Sithak quietly. "But it proves the dread is capable of trust. That is what we needed to know." The council debated again, but the tone had shifted. Doubt was creeping in. If a human could reach the dread in less than a week, what did that say about the Vraxian approach? On the 7th day, Doyen entered the throne room, and the dread immediately rose to greet him. The creature approached, head lowered, and butted gently against Doyen's shoulder. A greeting. A welcome. Doyen smiled and scratched behind the dread's ears. "Good morning to you too." They spent the day together. Doyen brought books and read aloud, his voice filling the quiet throne room. The dread lay beside him, sometimes dozing, sometimes watching with those intense eyes. When Doyen moved, the creature followed. When Doyen sat, the dread settled nearby. By midday, the dread was comfortable enough to roll onto its side, exposing its belly. This was the ultimate sign of trust among predators, the most vulnerable position possible. Doyen rubbed the creature's belly scales, finding spots that made the dread's back leg kick reflexively. He laughed, and the sound echoed through the throne room. The dread rumbled in response, a sound of contentment. Hyajin sat near the entrance, documenting everything. Her eyes were wet as she typed her notes. She had seen many things in her career as an anthropologist, but this was special. This was a creature that had been isolated for thousands of years. Learning to trust again because one person took the time to see it as an individual. That evening, Sithak requested a private meeting with Doyen. They met in a small garden outside the palace. The prince looked tired but thoughtful. "I have been studying the old records," Sithak said. "You were right. The ancient warlords lived alongside the dread. They understood what my family forgot. We stopped seeing it as a companion and made it into a symbol." "Symbols don't need affection," Doyen said. "But living creatures do." Sithak nodded slowly. Would it be possible for me to try approaching? With your help?" Doyen considered this carefully. "Maybe, but you have to understand the dread will be testing you. It's not about your bloodline or your right to rule. It's about whether you can be trusted. How do I prove that? By being patient. By being gentle. By treating the dread like a person, not a tool." Sithak looked at his hands. They were the hands of a scholar, not a warrior like his siblings. "I think I can do that." "Then we'll try tomorrow," Doyen said. "But we go slow. The dread has to choose to accept you." The next morning, Sithak entered the throne room with Doyen. He wore simple clothes, no weapons, No symbols of rank. Just a person approaching cautiously. The dread rose when it saw him, instantly alert. Its eyes fixed on the prince. Doyen placed his hand on the dread's flank. It's okay. This is Sithak. He's a friend. The dread looked at Doyen, then back at Sithak. The creature took one step forward, testing. Sithak stopped walking and knelt down, making himself smaller, less threatening. He did not speak. He simply waited. The dread approached slowly, sniffing the air. It circled Sithak once, examining him from all angles. Then it stepped closer and pressed its nose against the prince's chest, breathing in his scent. Sithak remained perfectly still, barely breathing. After a long moment, the dread stepped back. It did not show aggression. Instead, it looked at Doyen as if seeking confirmation. He's good, Doyen said softly. I trust him. The dread made a small sound, almost inquisitive. Then it lay down between Doyen and Sithak, settling into a watchful rest. Not a rejection. An acceptance of presence, if not yet full trust. It was enough. It was a beginning. Over the next 2 days, Sithak joined Doyen in the throne room every morning. They followed a careful routine. Doyen would enter first, greet the dread, and spend time brushing its scales and talking quietly. Then Sithak would arrive, moving slowly, always stopping when the dread showed any signs of tension. The creature began to accept the pattern. On the 8th day when Sithak entered, the dread's tail moved. Just a small shift, but definitely a wag. Recognition. Maybe even welcome. Sithak sat beside Doyen and they talked about ordinary things. Books they had read, places they had traveled, the weather. Nothing about politics or thrones or power. Just two people having a conversation while a massive creature listened. The dread moved closer. It settled down with its head resting near Sithak's knee. Not quite touching, but close enough that the prince could feel the heat radiating from the creature's body. May I? Sithak asked quietly, reaching toward the dread's head. Doyen nodded. Go slowly. Sithak extended his hand and gently placed it on the dread's scaled forehead. The creature's eyes closed partway. It leaned slightly into the touch. Sithak's hand trembled. This creature had terrified his siblings, killed guards, protected the throne for 3,000 years. And now it was accepting his touch like a pet, accepting affection from its owner. Thank you, Sithak whispered. Thank you for giving me a chance. The dread rumbled, a sound that vibrated through the floor. Not a threatening growl, something gentler, something that might have been contentment. They spent hours there. Yijin arrived with lunch for everyone, including large portions of meat for the dread. The creature ate from Sithak's hand, taking the food with surprising gentleness despite those massive jaws. By evening, the dread was comfortable enough to rest its head in Sithak's lap. The prince ran his fingers over the scales, following the patterns, finding the spots that made the creature's eyes close in pleasure. I never understood, Sithak said quietly. My father, my grandfather, all the emperors before. They saw the dread as a tool, a test of worthiness. They never saw this, because they never tried, Doyen replied. They expected loyalty without offering companionship. That's not how bonds work. How do humans know these things? Sithak asked. You made this look easy. Doyen shook his head. It's not easy. It takes time and patience. But humans have thousands of years of experience living alongside other species. Dogs, cats, horses, birds. We'd learned that if you treat another creature with respect and kindness, if you try to understand what they need, they'll meet you halfway. We forgot that, Sithak said. We became so advanced, so powerful, that we stopped seeing others as individuals. We saw tools and resources and assets. The dread shifted, pressing closer to Sithak as if offering comfort. The prince smiled and scratched behind the creature's ears. That evening, the High Council gathered again. Nari presented her report, showing footage of Sithak with the dread. The room fell silent as they watched the massive creature rest its head in the prince's lap, watched Sithak stroke its scales with gentle care. This is unprecedented, one counselor said. The dread has never shown such behavior. Not in recorded history. Because no one tried, Nari replied. No one treated it as anything but a guardian. The humans saw what we missed. Vera stood up, her face tight with anger. So the throne will go to Sithak because a human played with a creature. This is not how succession works. The dread accepts him, another counselor pointed out. Is that not the entire purpose of the guardian? To recognize the rightful heir? It recognizes the human more than it recognizes my brother, Vera snapped. Look at that footage. The creature follows the human everywhere. This is not a proper bonding. She had a point. In the footage, the dread clearly showed more attachment to Doyen than to Sithak. The creature watched Doyen constantly, responded to his voice immediately, sought his touch. Kelrin, who had been silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. What if we remove the human? Force the dread to choose between the three of us without his interference? That would be cruel, Sithak said quietly. The dread has finally found companionship after thousands of years alone. You want to take that away? I want a legitimate emperor, Kelrin said. Not a throne claimed through alien manipulation. The argument grew heated. Some counselors supported Vera's position. Others argued that Sithak had proven himself by taking the time to understand the dread. A few suggested more drastic measures. Finally, an elderly counselor named Miran stood up. She was ancient. Her scales faded to pale gray, but her voice carried authority. We are asking the wrong questions, she said. We debate who has the right to the throne, but we ignore the larger issue. The dread's behavior has revealed a fundamental flaw in our empire. We have spent thousands of years treating loyalty as something that can be engineered and demanded. The human has shown us that loyalty must be earned through respect and care. She paused, looking around the chamber. Perhaps the crisis with the dread is not a problem to be solved. Perhaps it is a lesson to be learned. Her words hung in the air. Several counselors nodded slowly. Others looked uncomfortable, as if facing a truth they did not want to acknowledge. What do you propose? Farah asked coldly. That we accept what has happened, Moran replied. Sithak has the dread's acceptance even if it is not yet a full bond. That is more than either of you achieved. But we must also acknowledge the human's role. Without Doyen, none of this would be possible. So we give the throne to my brother and reward the human? Kelrin asked. That is your solution. I propose we create a new position, Moran said. Imperial Beastmaster. Someone whose responsibility is the well-being of the dread, ensuring it never suffers from isolation again. Someone who understands creatures not as tools, but as living beings with needs. And you would give this position to a human? Farah demanded. I would give it to the person who earned the dread's trust when all of us failed, Moran replied calmly. Yes, that person happens to be human. Perhaps that should tell us something about our own limitations. The debate continued for hours. Finally, they reached a decision. They would offer Sithak the throne, with the condition that Doyen accept the position of Imperial Beastmaster. If Doyen refused, they would have to reconsider all options, including destroying the dread and starting fresh with a new succession system. A messenger was sent to Doyen that night. He was in his quarters writing notes about the day's progress when the knock came. Nari stood at the door. The council requests your presence. Doyen followed her through the palace corridors, wondering what new complication had arisen. When they entered the council chamber, he found himself facing all the high-ranking officials of the empire. Miran spoke for the group. Doyen of humanity, the High Council has made a decision. We offer Prince Sithak the throne, recognizing his acceptance by the dread. But we also recognize that this acceptance depends largely on your presence and expertise. She paused. We would like to create a new position, Imperial Beastmaster. Your responsibility would be the care and well-being of the dread, ensuring it receives proper socialization and care. You would be tied to the throne, a permanent member of the imperial household. Doyen stared at her. You want me to stay here? Permanently? We understand this is a significant request, Moran said. You would have to leave your previous life, your research, your homeworld. But you would be doing something important. You would be preventing the dread from ever being isolated again. Doyen thought about the dread, about those ancient eyes that had seen 3,000 years of loneliness, about the way the creature pressed its head against his chest, seeking comfort it had not received in millennia. I have conditions, Doyen said slowly. Name them, Miran replied. The dread must be treated as a companion, not just a guardian. It needs time outside this throne room. It needs social interaction, environmental enrichment, proper care. Agreed. Other humans must be allowed to study Vraxian bioengineering, not to copy it but to learn from it. We need to establish proper protocols for the psychological welfare of all created creatures. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably, but Moran nodded. We can arrange that. And one more thing, Doyen said. The dread needs a proper name. Not Vilcruther. Not the dread. A real name. What would you call it? Sithak asked, speaking for the first time. Doyen smiled. Baram, it's an old word from my language. It means wind or wish. Something free and hopeful. The dread, he thought, deserved both those things. Miran looked around the chamber, reading the faces of the other counselors. Finally, she nodded. Then it is decided. Sithak will be emperor, and you will be imperial beastmaster. The coronation will take place in 3 days. Doyen bowed his head, accepting the weight of responsibility he had just taken on. In that moment, he thought of the dread waiting in the throne room, probably wondering where he had gone. Can I go tell Baram? He asked. Several counselors looked startled that he would ask permission. Miran smiled. Of course. Go tell your friend. The 3 days before the coronation passed in a blur of preparation. The palace filled with nobles and fleet commanders from across the empire. Some came to support Sithak. Others came out of curiosity, wanting to see the human who had tamed the legendary guardian. Doyen spent every day with Baram. He moved his belongings into a room near the throne hall so he could respond quickly if the creature needed him. At night, he could hear Baram moving in the darkness, pacing the throne room as it had for thousands of years. On the second night, Doyen could not sleep. He got up and walked to the throne room. Baram was awake, lying near the throne with its head on its paws. When it saw Doyen, its tail began to move, thumping against the floor. Can't sleep either, Doyen asked, walking across the chamber. He sat down beside the massive creature, leaning against its warm flank. Lot of changes coming. Baram rumbled softly, a sound Doyen had learned meant contentment or agreement. You know, Doyen said quietly, on Earth, we have stories about dragons. Big creatures like you, powerful and dangerous. In the old stories, they guarded treasure or princesses. Everyone feared them. But sometimes in the best stories, someone would see past the fear. They would see that the dragon was lonely or hurt or just misunderstood, and they would become friends. He scratched behind Baram's ear. I think you're like those dragons. Everyone saw the danger and forgot to look deeper. Forgot to see that you were lonely. Baram turned its head and pressed its snout against Doyen's shoulder. The gesture was gentle despite the creature's size. I'm going to make sure you're never lonely again, Doyen promised. That's my job now. Imperial Beastmaster. Fancy title for friend of dragons, right? They sat together in the darkness, a human and a creature that was never meant to have friends. Above them, the captured starlight in the crystals flickered like distant hopes finally coming true. The morning of the coronation arrived with cold sunlight streaming through the palace windows. The throne room had been cleaned and decorated. Banners hung from the walls. Every seat in the observation galleries was filled with nobles in their formal clothing. Doyen wore simple clothing, refusing the elaborate robes the palace staff had offered. He was not here as decoration. He was here as Baram's companion and advocate. Hyejin found him before the ceremony. Are you ready for this? No, Doyen admitted. I'm a xenobiologist. I study creatures. I'm not supposed to become part of an alien government. You're exactly what this government needs, Hyejin said firmly. Someone who remembers that power comes with responsibility to care for others, not just command them. Nari appeared at the doorway. It's time. The ceremony began with traditional Vraxian rituals, songs in the old language, blessings from spiritual leaders, the reading of imperial lineage going back thousands of years. Doyen stood to the side, watching Sithak walk through each ritual with quiet dignity. Finally came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Sithak approached the throne. The room fell silent. Baram rose to its feet. Every person in the room held their breath. This was the test. Would the creature accept Sithak without Doyen's direct intervention? Sithak stopped at the traditional 30-pace mark. He looked at Baram, then at Doyen. Doyen nodded encouragingly but did not move from his position. Sithak took one step forward, then another. Baram watched but did not growl. The prince kept walking, his movements calm and steady, until he stood just 5 paces from the throne. Baram moved forward. Its massive head swung toward Sithak, examining him with those glowing eyes. The prince held out his hand, palm up, offering respect without demanding submission. For a long moment, nothing happened. The entire room waited. Then Baram pressed its head against Sithak's hand. A gentle push, the kind a dog might give when seeking attention, acceptance, Recognition. Not the full bond the ancient warlords had achieved, but something real nonetheless. Sithak smiled and scratched behind Baram's ear. Then he walked the final steps to the throne and sat down. The moment he settled into the seat, Baram moved. The creature positioned itself beside the throne, head high and alert. Guardian and companion both. The room erupted in sound. Some cheered. Others whispered in amazement. Farah's face was tight with anger, but she bowed her head in acknowledgement. Kelrin looked thoughtful, as if reconsidering everything he thought he knew about power and leadership. Miran stepped forward and placed the imperial seal around Sithak's neck. Emperor Sithak, first of his name, recognized by tradition and by the sacred guardian. May your reign bring wisdom and renewal to the empire. Sithak stood and the crowd bowed, but the new emperor did something unprecedented. He turned to Doyen and gestured for him to approach. Doyen walked forward, very aware of every eye on him. When he reached the throne, Sithak spoke clearly so everyone could hear. I claim this throne not through conquest or birthright alone, but through understanding. Understanding that was taught to me by Doyen of humanity. Therefore I name him Imperial Beastmaster, Guardian of the Guardian, Friend to the Friendless. He placed a simple medallion around Doyen's neck. It bore the symbol of the Empire, but also a new mark. A stylized image of Baram with its tail raised. From this day forward, Sithak continued, the welfare of all created beings in this empire will be considered alongside all other matters of state. We will remember what our ancestors knew, that loyalty cannot be commanded, only earned through respect and care. More cheering, though some of it sounded uncertain. This was a dramatic change in imperial philosophy. Many would resist it, but Doyun noticed some faces in the crowd looking hopeful. Younger nobles, scientists, people who had perhaps always felt uncomfortable with the empire's harsh approach to power. The formal ceremony concluded, but a reception followed in the great hall. Doyen found himself surrounded by Vraxians wanting to ask questions. How did he communicate with Baram? What techniques did he use? Could these methods work with other creatures? A military commander approached, a tall Vraxian with scars across her scales. We have war beasts, she said. Creatures engineered for combat. Many are unstable. They kill their handlers. Could your methods help? Maybe, Doyen said carefully. But you have to be willing to see them as individuals, not weapons. Are you prepared for that? The commander was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded. If it means fewer handlers die, yes. I'm willing to try. One by one, others came forward with similar questions. Scientists working with engineered species that had behavioral problems. Farmers with livestock that had become aggressive. Even pet owners struggling with creatures they did not understand. Hyejin watched from the side, smiling. She caught Doyen's eye and mouthed, You started something. By evening, Doyen was exhausted from all the conversations. He excused himself and returned to the throne room, which was now quiet and empty except for Baram. The creature was lying near the throne but rose when Doyen entered. It approached and pressed its head against his chest in greeting. Big day, Doyen said, wrapping his arms around Baram's neck as far as they would reach. You did good. Sithak is a good choice. Baram rumbled in agreement. Then, to Doyen's surprise, the creature moved toward the throne room doors. It looked back at Doyen, clearly waiting. You want to go outside? Doyen asked. Baram's tail wagged, an unmistakable yes. Doyen laughed. Okay, let's see if we can arrange that. They walked through the palace corridors together, drawing stares from everyone they passed. Doyen led Baram to one of the gardens, a large open space with soft grass and trees. When they stepped outside, Baram froze. For a moment, Doyen worried something was wrong. Then he realized. Baram had not been outside in thousands of years. The creature had spent its entire existence in that throne room. Slowly, Baram stepped onto the grass, its head lifted, testing the wind. The creature's eyes closed, and it made a sound Doyen had never heard before. Something between a sigh and a song. Then Baram ran. The massive creature sprinted across the garden, claws tearing up grass, tail streaming behind. It ran in wide circles, jumping over fountains, dodging trees, playing. After 3,000 years, the Guardian was finally playing. Doyen watched with tears in his eyes. This was what he had hoped for. Not just acceptance of the new emperor, but freedom for a creature that had been imprisoned by duty. Nari and Hyejin found him there an hour later. Barum was lying in the grass, rolling on its back like a giant dog, making happy sounds. You really did it, Nari said quietly. You gave it back its life. We all did, Doyen replied. Sithek was willing to try something new. The council was willing to listen. Barum was brave enough to trust again. I just helped connect the pieces. That's what humans do best, isn't it? Hyejin said. You find connections others miss. You see relationships where others see only resources. Maybe, Doyen said, or maybe we're just too emotional to ignore suffering when we see it. They watched Barum roll in the grass, and Nari made a sound that might have been laughter. If that's a weakness, I hope more of us learn to be weak like that. In the months that followed, news of what happened spread across the Empire. Other humans arrived, specialists in animal behavior and psychology. They worked with Vraxian scientists, sharing knowledge, learning from each other. Emperor Sithak's reign began with reforms. The treatment of engineered creatures became a priority. New laws protected their welfare. Research focused on understanding the psychological needs of created beings. It was not easy. Many traditionalists resisted. Bara led a faction that opposed what they called weakening the empire. But slowly, gradually, attitudes began to shift, especially when the war beast that had been stabilized using Doyen's methods proved more effective than ever before. Loyalty earned through care was stronger than loyalty enforced through fear. Doyen settled into his new life. Every morning he woke and went to Barum. They walked in the gardens. They spent time in the throne room when Sithek held court. Barum lay beside the throne, calm and content, but always ready to protect if needed. At night, Doyen often found the Emperor sitting on the throne room steps talking to Barum like a friend. The relationship between ruler and guardian had transformed into something neither had expected, genuine companionship. One evening, 6 months after the coronation, Sithek asked Doyen a question. Do you regret it? Staying here instead of returning to your research? Doyen thought about his old life. The laboratories, the research papers, the academic debates. Then he looked at Barum, who was dozing peacefully nearby, and at Sithek, who had become a friend. No, Doyen said. I think this is the most important research I could ever do, proving that bridges can be built between any species if both sides are willing to try. Sithek nodded. You change the empire. One creature at a time, you're teaching us to see differently. Barum changed the empire, Doyen corrected, by being brave enough to trust after so much loneliness. I just listened. As if hearing its name, Barum stirred. The creature lifted its massive head and looked at both of them. Then its tail began to move, thumping against the floor in a steady, happy rhythm, a wag. The universal language of contentment understood across species and stars, a simple gesture that meant home, safety, friendship, and love. And in that moment, in a throne room that had known 3,000 years of fear and isolation, there was finally peace.